I want to go back to this space right here to highlight another important aspect of cover-based combat battlefield design. And so in this space, we have, as I'd describe it, two different styles of walls. So we have, we first have these outer walls with occasional doors here and there, but they're very widely spaced. And then we have these interior walls right here that have quite a lot of doors and windows. So essentially, much like there is a major strategic difference or major affordance difference between high cover and low cover, so do these walls as well. So these more solid walls here are what I call backboards. So let me explain. When the player takes cover on an object like this, they do so in anticipation of a threat that's coming from this direction, in that the cover itself negates that threat. But, you know, what about all the threats from these other directions? So maybe instead the player has found a strategic position where they are protected by another piece of cover, as we talked about before, of cover interaction here. But they still have the possibility of threats coming in from a lot of other directions. So, and of course, this cover that's here on the right might block a line of sight, but it doesn't really keep enemies from advancing on you and coming around it. In fact, actually might mask their approach, because you can't actually see through this cover as well. So they could just charge and run around it. But when the player is in cover with their back against a solid wall, against a backboard wall, the threats are, to a certain extent, controlled. The backboard is your ally in combat, as much as the cover that's in front of you. So in a tough situation with a lot of enemies, it's impossible for a player to keep track of every single threat in 3D space. The precise movement and direction that precise behavior of all of the different enemies points, the entrances and exits, everything essentially. So the backboard is kind of like the player's foundation to work from. This is the essentially the this is where they are able to sort of control a lot of the variables at work here. It's predictable. And the fact that it's solid, and that it is so solid, is very, very crucial. So any windows and doors that might be here, even if they were fake doors and windows that didn't actually work, it begins to weaken sort of the concept of this solid impervious wall, and to imply that there might be space on the other side of it, uncontrolled space, and therefore threatening space on the other side of this wall. So, but here, this backboard, with its lack of doors and windows and stuff like that, might as well be a mile thick. And that's sort of the quality that you want in a good backboard, the sense that you can trust it, you can turn your back to it and not have to worry about threats or anything coming from that direction. But even in this case right here, the battlefield is pretty hard to control. If you think about what is the player's field of view, maybe 90 degrees. I think is Uncharted's like 72, something like that. Anyway, essentially, there's no way to keep an eye on this 180 degrees around the player. So, okay, now we're talking. So, having a solid backboard on two sides is a really good position to be able to fight from. So, in this position, the player is only flankable from one side. So, from this side of the cover, from this side, of course, and from here, only from this side. so they can keep their eye a lot more sort of in this direction and focus on keeping the threats away from this position, so their cover position doesn't get uncovered. And so from this, the player can feel a lot more in control of the battlefield. So what about this? So here we've got 3 backboards for the player. So first of all, this is sort of bad layout design because the player now cannot be flanked, so enemies sort of have to come straight on, and this sort of encourages the pop and shot, just stay behind a single piece of cover gameplay that we want to avoid. And depending on your systemic design, this also might feel very uncomfortable for the player as well, since if you have enemies that are capable of being armored and being able to charge in, the player essentially has nowhere to escape. So they're going to be in a lot of trouble if they need to move. They're going to be forced to move in the direction where the enemy are. So generally, a great position to be in is actually in sort of this 2 backboards and 2 open directions. So the other style of walls that that I'm calling out in sort of this space are what I call screens. So a screen is a porous boundary between 2 spaces. It's an edge. It's too unpredictable because of the fact that it's so porous to depend on as a backboard, for instance. So if you were taking cover here, you can't really depend on nothing happening behind you because you don't really control all that space. You have all this open space to worry about. So, but what a screen does is dramatically, what a screen does is that it advertises a change. It's an edge. It advertises a dramatic change in spatial use. So here, the screen protects this refuge space back here, which is a separate type of strategic space from the space over here. And the player can flee into this refuge space, and if they're in trouble out in this space, they can flee into it and use its combination of occlusion and also porousness in order to hide in and then re-enter the main combat space at a safer position. So the difference between backboards and screens is, a variance of degrees. It's not always cut and dry. It really depends on just how many holes you have in it, how porous it is, and that's really kind of what defines it. But strategically, the difference is huge. So if you think about the opportunity that you want a wall to represent for the player and how it influences the strategy of the space, it's really important to create a buffer zone between the two, that you have very strong sense of, okay, this is a backboard. There is no porousness. We have no windows here. This feels very solid, and the player can take cover here and trust this solid wall behind them. Same thing if they're fighting from an enemy coming in this direction and we're behind these pillars right here, we can trust in the fact that we have this backboard behind us. And this would be even stronger if we shut this door as well. That way the player would only have to worry about threats coming from this direction and this direction. So yeah, that is backboards and screens.